3 generations of memories, gone in a single signature, my uncle announced with cold satisfaction, sliding the sale papers across the mahogany desk that once belonged to our grandfather. The estate has been sold. You have until the end of the month to collect your personal items. I stood frozen in my grandparents' library, surrounded by the antique books and family photographs that had witnessed a century of our family's history, suddenly facing eviction from the very heart of my heritage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The spring rain tapped gently against the leaded glass windows of Oak Ridge Manor as I sorted through decades of family correspondence in the library. My grandmother, Eleonora, had been meticulous about preserving every letter, invitation, and handwritten note, organizing them by year in beautiful leather-bound albums that lined the oak shelves. 3 weeks into cataloging this precious archive for the Family Historical Society, I had barely made a dent in the collection spanning from 1915 to 2022. This sprawling Victorian estate had been in our family for 4 generations, passed down from my great-grandfather, who had built it in 1890 after making his fortune in publishing. The 12-acre property, with its main house, guest cottage, and caretaker's residence nestled among ancient oak trees, had witnessed countless Christmases, summer reunions, weddings, and wakes. For me, Oak Ridge wasn't simply property. It was the physical embodiment of our family's legacy. After my grandmother's passing last autumn at the age of 96, the family had entered a period of respectful mourning. There had been preliminary discussions about the estate's future, of course. My father, before his death 5 years earlier, had always spoken of establishing a family trust to preserve Oak Ridge. As the family historian and the only Caldwell who had chosen to pursue academia rather than business, I had volunteered to spend my sabbatical year living at the estate, organizing my grandmother's extensive collections while the family decided on long-term arrangements. Eleanor would have appreciated your dedication to preserving her archives, my grandmother's dear friend Margaret had remarked during her visit last month. She always said you understood the value of legacy better than anyone. The sound of car tires on gravel interrupted my cataloging. Glancing out the rain-speckled window, I recognized my Uncle Robert's sleek black Mercedes pulling up the circular driveway, followed by the unfamiliar silver Lexus of his oldest son, Jeffrey. Neither had bothered to call before arriving, which was unusual even for my uncle's typically imperious manner. Wiping the dust from my hands, I made my way down the grand staircase to greet them, noting with mild irritation that they hadn't bothered to remove their shoes despite the muddy conditions. Robert Caldwell had always moved through the world, as if it existed solely for his convenience, a trait he had effectively passed to his 3 children. "Ah, Alexandra," my uncle called out, not bothering to meet me at the entrance, but instead proceeding directly to grandfather's study as if I were merely staff. "Good, you're here. We have matters to discuss." Following them into the wood-paneled study where my grandfather had once taught me chess and Latin declensions, I sensed immediately that something was amiss. My cousin's wife Vanessa was also present, examining the antique globe by the window, with a measuring look that made me uneasy. "I trust you've been comfortable here," Uncle Robert began, settling into grandfather's chair without ceremony. "Productive with your—" He waved his hand dismissively. "Historical project." "Very productive," I replied, remaining standing as no seat had been offered. "I've cataloged nearly 60 years of correspondence and begun digitizing grandmother's photo albums. The university archivist has expressed interest in—" "Yes. Well, that's all very nice," he interrupted, exchanging glances with Jeffrey. "But I'm afraid we need to discuss more practical matters." The next words hit like a physical blow. 3 generations of memories, gone in a single signature, my uncle announced with cold satisfaction, sliding the sale papers across the mahogany desk that once belonged to our grandfather. The estate has been sold. You have until the end of the month to collect your personal items. For several seconds, I could only stare at the documents, my brain refusing to process their implications. That's not possible, I finally managed. Grandmother's will specified a 6-month period before any decisions about the estate could be made. We're only in month 4, and there's been no family meeting, no consensus. The estate wasn't governed by Eleanor's will, Jeffrey cut in, his tone suggesting I was embarrassingly uninformed. The property was transferred to the Caldwell family holdings 5 years ago, with Dad as primary executor. It was a tax strategy Grandmother agreed to when her health began declining. I've never heard of any transfer, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears as shock gave way to disbelief. You weren't directly involved in Grandmother's financial affairs, Robert replied with the patronizing tone he reserved for what he considered women's confusion about business matters. It was a complex arrangement, but completely legitimate. The paperwork was all properly executed. And who exactly have you sold Oak Ridge to? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady as I picked up the sales agreement. The purchasing entity was listed as Meridian Development Partners. A very reputable development company, Vanessa chimed in, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood as she approached. They've done lovely luxury residential communities all through New England. They're planning to preserve some architectural elements while converting the property into 14 executive homes. Very exclusive. The casualness with which she described the dismantling of our family home made my stomach turn. And the family library? Grandmother's collections? The garden she spent 60 years cultivating? I asked, already knowing the answer. You have 4 weeks to remove any personal items you wish to keep, Robert repeated, glancing at his watch. The developers have generously allowed that timeline before beginning preparations for demolition. Demolition? I echoed hollowly. You're going to bulldoze a historic home that's been in our family for over a century. Alexandra, Jeffrey sighed, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. The property taxes alone are astronomical. The maintenance costs, the staffing requirements, it's financially unsustainable as a private residence. This sale represents a significant return on investment for all family shareholders. Shareholders, I repeated. Is that how you see our heritage? As shares to be liquidated when convenient? Robert's expression hardened. I understand you have a sentimental attachment to this place, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. The family voted. What vote? I demanded. I'm a direct descendant, same as you. Nobody consulted me about any vote. The vote was among shareholders of Caldwell Family Holdings, he clarified with thinning patience, which includes myself, Jeffrey, Christine, and Michael. As I said, the transfer was completed 5 years ago. 5 years ago, when Grandmother had been 91, when she had been grieving my father's unexpected death, when Robert had stepped in to help manage affairs during what he called her period of understandable emotional fragility. I want to see documentation of this transfer, I said. Grandmother would never have agreed to an arrangement that would result in Oak Ridge being destroyed. The documentation has all been properly filed with the family attorneys, Robert replied. Smoothly. But frankly, Alexandra, your approval isn't required. The decision is made. The contracts are signed. I merely came today as a courtesy to inform you personally and to give you adequate time to make arrangements. The practiced ease of his dismissal made it clear this was not a conversation, but a notification. They had not come to discuss, but to announce a fait accompli, probably assuming my academic background would translate to practical helplessness in the face of their business maneuvering. Now, if you'll excuse us, Robert continued, standing and rebuttoning his suit jacket, we need to meet with the developer's representative about some preliminary measurements. Feel free to continue your archival work until the deadline, of course. As they filed out toward the main hall, Vanessa paused, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a sympathetic tone. You might want to focus on the smaller antiques first, the porcelain, the silver, items that can be easily transported. The furniture market is quite saturated right now, so the larger pieces might not be worth the storage costs. After they departed, I stood motionless in the suddenly silent study, surrounded by generations of my family's presents. My grandfather's collection of first editions lined the walls. The portrait of my great-grandmother hung above the fireplace. My own childhood art still sat framed on the side table where grandmother had proudly displayed it, alongside photographs spanning a century of Caldwell history. The magnitude of what was happening slowly crystallized. Not just my eviction from a house, but the erasure of a physical connection to my ancestors. The destruction of a place that held our collective memory within its very walls. I sank into my grandfather's leather chair, my fingers absently tracing the worn armrests where his hands had rested for decades. The rain had intensified outside, drumming against the windows as if echoing my internal turmoil. The estate had weathered world wars, economic depressions, family triumphs and tragedies, only to fall victim to the cold calculation of profit margins. "This isn't over," I whispered to the empty room, a quiet promise to my grandparents and to myself. Something isn't right about this transfer, and I won't let Oak Ridge disappear without uncovering the truth. The conviction in my voice surprised me. In our family dynamics, I had always been the peacekeeper, the accommodating one, the bookish niece who could be counted on not to make waves. But in that moment, surrounded by the tangible history my grandparents had entrusted to future generations, I felt a steel entering my spine that I hadn't known existed. 4 weeks until demolition. 4 weeks to uncover whatever had actually transpired 5 years ago. 4 weeks to fight for Oak Ridge and everything it represented. I reached for my phone to call the one person who might help me navigate this unexpected battle. My grandmother's attorney, Samuel Winters. He had handled Caldwell family legal matters for over 40 years, and had always treated me with a respect that my business-focused relatives rarely demonstrated. As the phone rang, I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Oak Ridge Investigation. The first entry was the date of the alleged property transfer, followed by a simple question that would guide everything to come. What really happened 5 years ago? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel Winters' law office occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian in downtown Amberley, just 3 miles from Oak Ridge. Though he could have afforded more impressive quarters, Samuel had always preferred the character of the old building with its bay windows overlooking the town green. At 82, he had officially retired 5 times, yet continued to personally handle matters for a select group of long-standing clients, my grandmother chief among them. When I called explaining the situation, he'd immediately cleared his afternoon schedule. "This doesn't sound right at all, Alexandra," he'd said, his normally measured voice tinged with concern. "Your grandmother was exceedingly particular about the future of Oak Ridge. Come straight over." Now, sitting across from his desk while rain streamed down the windows, I watched as Samuel methodically reviewed the sales document I'd photographed with my phone. "Meridian Development," he murmured, adjusting his reading glasses. "They've been aggressively expanding throughout the county. Old estates like Oak Ridge are prime targets. Large acreage, minimal environmental restrictions since they're already developed. They typically bulldoze everything except perhaps a token historic facade. But the transfer to Caldwell Family Holdings? Is that legitimate?" I pressed. "Grandmother never mentioned anything about restructuring ownership of Oak Ridge." Samuel removed his glasses, polishing them deliberately while organizing his thoughts. "Your grandmother was adamantly opposed to any arrangement that would jeopardize the estate's integrity. We discussed various conservation easements and trust structures over the years, always with preservation as the primary goal. Then how Could this transfer have happened without your involvement? That, he said, replacing his glasses, is precisely what troubles me. According to the sale document, the transfer occurred in April 5 years ago. That would have been 2 months, after your father's passing. The timing made my stomach clench. My father, Edward Caldwell, had been grandmother's closest confidant and staunchest ally in family matters. His sudden heart attack had devastated her, and in the aftermath, Uncle Robert had stepped in to shoulder the burden of various family business matters. Eleanor was certainly distressed during that period, Samuel continued, but she remained entirely competent, and a transfer of this magnitude would have required extensive documentation, multiple meetings? He shook his head. I can't imagine her proceeding with such a significant change without consulting me, especially given our ongoing discussions about establishing a preservation trust. Could Robert have somehow convinced her it was necessary? Tax reasons? Perhaps. Possible, but unlikely. Your grandmother was remarkably sharp about financial matters. She understood the tax implications of her estate planning better than most professionals. Samuel's brow furrowed. I'd need to see the actual transfer documents, not just the sales agreement, to determine exactly what transpired. How do I get those? Robert said everything is with the family attorneys. I'm assuming that means Harrison and Boyd. My uncle had shifted all family business to the aggressive corporate firm years ago, despite grandmother's continued loyalty to Samuel. As a direct descendant and potential beneficiary of your grandmother's estate, you have legal standing to request documentation. I can prepare a formal demand letter immediately. Samuel began making notes. However, I suspect Robert won't be forthcoming. We should simultaneously explore county records. Property transfers must be officially recorded. An hour later, we were at the Amberley County Records Office, a fluorescent-lit labyrinth of filing cabinets and ancient computer terminals in the basement of the municipal building. Samuel's longtime friendship with the records administrator, Greta Holmwood, granted us immediate access despite the late afternoon hour. 5 years ago, April, Greta confirmed, fingers flying over her keyboard. Let me pull up the property transfers for Oak Ridge. That would be 145 Highland Road, correct? We waited as she navigated the database, Samuel occasionally asking clarifying questions about recent changes to the county's recording system. Finally, Greta turned the monitor toward us. Here it is. Transfer of deed from Eleanor Virginia Caldwell to Caldwell Family Holdings, LLC, recorded April 17th. My heart sank. So it was true. But as Samuel leaned forward to examine the record, his expression shifted from concern to puzzlement. May we see the actual document scan, please? He requested. Greta clicked through several screens before a PDF appeared, the official deed transfer with grandmother's signature clearly visible at the bottom. This is highly irregular, Samuel muttered, studying the document. The notary is Thomas Beckman. I don't recognize that name, and I know most of the notaries in Amberley. He's not local, Greta confirmed after a quick search. His commission is registered in Essex County, not here. And the witness signatures, Samuel continued. Catherine Phillips and James Wilson. Eleanor knew hundreds of people in this community. Why would she have unknown individuals witness such a significant document? I studied my grandmother's signature. Something about it nagged at me. May I see her signature on the previous deed? The one when she and grandfather initially took ownership? Greta located the document from 30 years earlier. When she placed them side by side on the screen, the discrepancy became immediately apparent. They're similar, I said slowly, but not identical. Grandmother always made her final R with a distinctive flourish, like this one on the older deed. The newer signature is missing that detail. Samuel's expression darkened. We need copies of everything, Greta. And I'd like to confirm whether any other Caldwell properties were transferred during this period. 30 minutes and several document fees later, we had our answer. Not just Oak Ridge, but 3 other family properties had been transferred to Caldwell Family Holdings within the same week. The lake house in New Hampshire, the apartment in Boston, and the small office building downtown that had housed the original Caldwell Publishing headquarters. Back in Samuel's office, surrounded by stacks of property records, we tried to piece together what had happened. This appears to be a coordinated restructuring of all major Caldwell real estate assets, Samuel observed. But the timing and execution raised serious questions. Eleanor was still in mourning for your father. The notary and witnesses are unknown, figures from outside the community. And the signatures, while similar enough to pass casual inspection. You think they're forgeries, I stated flatly. Samuel chose his words carefully. I think there are sufficient irregularities to warrant further investigation. Property transfers executed under questionable circumstances can potentially be invalidated, but we would need compelling evidence. Like proof that grandmother never actually signed these documents, or that she was somehow coerced. Precisely. Or evidence that she lacked proper understanding of what she was signing. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. We need to track down these witnesses, and the notary, and we need to establish your grandmother's actual whereabouts and condition during the week these transfers supposedly occurred. I pulled out my laptop and opened my research notes. I've been organizing grandmother's calendars and correspondence as part of my archival work. I should be able to reconstruct her schedule from that period. Excellent. And I'll begin inquiries about this notary, Thomas Beckman. Something about this entire arrangement feels orchestrated. Samuel fixed me with a serious gaze. Alexandra, you should prepare yourself. If what we suspect is true, if Robert somehow engineered fraudulent transfers of your grandmother's properties, this could become an extremely contentious legal battle. I understand. The magnitude of what we were potentially uncovering made my pulse quicken. But Oak Ridge is worth fighting for, not just the property itself, but what it represents. Grandmother's wishes, our family's legacy. Indeed. Samuel's expression softened slightly. Eleanor often remarked that of all her grandchildren, you were the one who truly understood the value of heritage, not just as financial assets, but as living connections to our past and foundations for our future. As I gathered my materials to leave, a realization struck me. The library, grandmother's records. If there's evidence about these transfers, it might be in her personal papers. I need to search more thoroughly before Robert realizes what we're doing. Be discreet, Samuel cautioned. If your suspicions are correct, Robert has already demonstrated he's willing to go to extraordinary lengths to control these assets. Don't underestimate what he might do if he believes his arrangements are being threatened. Driving back to Oak Ridge through the rainy evening, I felt a curious mix of dread and determination. The possibility that my uncle had actively defrauded his own mother, my beloved grandmother, to gain control of family properties was deeply disturbing. Yet beneath the shock and betrayal lay a steely resolve that surprised me. For years, I had accepted my designated role in the family hierarchy. The academic, the historian, the keeper of stories deemed interesting, but ultimately less valuable, than the real work of business and finance that occupied Robert and his children. My father had been the only one who truly valued my perspective, and after his death, I had retreated further into my scholarly pursuits, avoiding confrontation with Robert's increasingly controlling management of family affairs. But as Oak Ridge emerged through the mist ahead of me, its grand silhouette outlined against the darkening sky, warm lights glowing from windows that had witnessed over a century of Caldwell history, I felt something fundamental shifting within me. This wasn't just about property rights or family disagreements. This was about truth, justice, and honoring the legacy my grandmother had spent her lifetime protecting. If Robert had indeed manipulated or forged documents during my grandmother's period of grief, he hadn't just betrayed her trust. He had attempted to rewrite our family's story through deception. As the family historian, I could not allow that false narrative to stand unchallenged. I parked near the side entrance, away from the main drive where visitors would immediately be visible from most of the house. For the first time, I felt like an investigator in my childhood home, acutely aware that the 4-week countdown to potential demolition was already underway. Whatever evidence existed within these walls, I needed to find it quickly, before it disappeared forever beneath the bulldozers of Meridian development. The soft glow of my desk lamp illuminated stacks of leather-bound journals and meticulously labeled folders spread across the library table. For 3 nights since my meeting with Samuel, I had systematically worked through my grandmother's personal archives, searching for any evidence related to the property transfers. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, its resonant chimes echoing through the quiet house as I rubbed my tired eyes. My search had yielded several promising discoveries. First, I'd found my grandmother's appointment calendar from the period in question, which showed she had been in Boston for a medical consultation the very day the Oak Ridge transfer was supposedly signed in Amberley. Second, I'd uncovered correspondence between grandmother and her financial advisor dated just 2 months before the transfers, discussing plans to establish a conservation trust for Oak Ridge, directly contradicting any notion that she intended to reorganize ownership for development. Most compelling was a journal entry from 3 months after the alleged transfers. Robert continues to press about modernizing our family holdings. I've made my position clear. Oak Ridge must remain intact for future generations. Edward would have insisted on it, and I will honor his vision. Nothing in these materials suggested grandmother had any knowledge of transferring her properties to a holding company controlled by Robert. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the east wing, pulling me from my thoughts. Though Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, lived in the caretaker's cottage, she rarely entered the main house after dinner. I held my breath, listening intently. Another creak, followed by the distinct sound of a door opening and closing. Someone else was in the house. I quickly gathered the most critical documents into a folder and switched off the desk lamp. Years of childhood exploration had taught me every secret passage and service corridor in the old house. Moving silently through the library's side entrance, I made my way through the narrow hallway that once allowed staff to move unobtrusively between rooms. Voices drifted from the direction of the study, one unmistakably my cousin Jeffrey's, the other unfamiliar. I crept closer, positioning myself near the hidden service entrance that opened behind a bookcase. The old lady had rooms full of this junk, Jeffrey was saying, his tone dismissive. Most of it will go to auction, but we need to make sure there's nothing problematic before the clearance crew arrives. Define problematic, the other voice responded. Documents, letters, anything with signatures or legal language. My father was explicit. All papers go directly to him for review before anyone else sees them. My blood ran cold. Robert was having the house searched, looking to eliminate evidence of his fraud before it could be discovered. What about the niece? I thought she was staying here. Jeffrey laughed. Alexandra? She's harmless, some academic type who collects family stories. She has no idea about business matters. Besides, she's probably asleep by now. Just work quickly and quietly. I eased back from the door, mind racing. I needed to get the documents I'd already discovered out of the house immediately, then find a way to secure any remaining evidence before Robert's people could remove it. Navigating silently through the service corridors, I reached my bedroom, gathered my laptop and research notes, and slipped out through the garden entrance. 10 minutes later, I was driving toward town, adrenaline coursing through my system. Robert wasn't just selling Oak Ridge, he was actively covering his tracks. This was no longer just about saving a family estate, it was about exposing a deliberate fraud. I couldn't go to Samuel's at this hour, and returning to Oak Ridge tonight was too risky. After a moment's deliberation, I turned toward Lakeview Drive, where my childhood friend Megan Harrington now ran the small inn she had inherited from her parents. The Preston House Inn's porch light glowed warmly despite the late hour. Megan, dressed in sweatpants and an oversized university sweatshirt, answered my urgent knock with surprised concern. "Alex? What's happened?" Once inside, I explained the situation in hushed tones while Megan prepared tea in the inn's country kitchen. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she absorbed the details of Robert's scheme and the current search of Oak Ridge. "So they're literally ransacking your grandmother's home right now, looking for evidence of their own fraud," she summarized, setting a steaming mug before me. "That's beyond outrageous. It's criminal." "The problem is proving it," I replied, opening my laptop to show her the scanned documents. "I have circumstantial evidence suggesting the transfers were fraudulent, but nothing definitive yet." Megan had known my family for decades. Her parents' inn had been a favorite recommendation of my grandparents for visitors to Amberley, creating a close relationship between our families. More importantly, Megan served on the town's Historical Preservation Committee and had successfully fought several development projects that threatened Amberley's architectural heritage. "You need allies," she said decisively, pulling out her phone. "Not just Samuel, though he's invaluable, but people who understand what's at stake if Oak Ridge is demolished." She began typing a rapid text message. "Claire Bennett on the county. Commission has been fighting Meridian's developments for years. They tried to bulldoze the Old Mill District last spring, and she helped organize the resistance that eventually got the area designated as a historic district. Robert has a lot of influence in this town," I cautioned. "The Caldwell name still carries weight." "So does historical truth and community values," Megan countered. "Besides, your grandmother was beloved here in a way Robert never will be. People remember how she opened Oak Ridge for community events, funded the library renovation, preserved the town archives when the municipality couldn't afford proper storage." As we talked, Megan outlined potential approaches: seeking emergency historical designation for Oak Ridge, challenging the sale based on fraudulent prior transfers, investigating the mysterious notary and witnesses, and building community support to pressure both Meridian and local officials. "The key is working on multiple fronts simultaneously," she explained. "Even if one approach fails, the combined pressure creates leverage." By dawn, we had developed a preliminary action plan and list of potential allies. Megan had arranged for me to stay in a vacant room at the inn while we assessed the situation at Oak Ridge. "You can't go back there immediately," she insisted. "Not if Robert has people searching the house. Get some rest, and we'll start making calls in a few hours." Despite my exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The image of strangers rifling through my grandmother's precious archives, potentially destroying evidence of Robert's deception, kept my mind churning with anxiety and indignation. When I finally emerged around 9, Megan had already been busy. Claire Bennett from the county commission was waiting in the inn's private dining room, along with Martin Rodriguez, an architectural historian who had documented several historic Amberley homes for preservation records. Megan explained the situation, Claire said, shaking my hand firmly. Her practical pantsuit and direct manner reflected her reputation as a no-nonsense advocate for responsible development. Meridian has been using questionable tactics throughout the county. If we can prove they knowingly purchased property with fraudulent provenance, it could impact all their current projects. Martin nodded agreement. Oak Ridge isn't just personally significant to your family, Alexandra. It's architecturally important to the entire region. The original McIntyre design, the hand-carved woodwork, the intact servants' quarters, these features make it irreplaceable from a historical perspective. We've been documenting the house for years, I explained, showing them my research. Your grandmother was passionate about preserving its history. That documentation could be crucial for an emergency preservation petition, Martin replied. If we can secure even temporary protected status, It would prevent demolition while the ownership issues are investigated. Claire studied the property, transfer records I'd obtained. These irregularities are significant. The notary issue alone raises serious questions. I can have my office investigate this Thomas Beckman's credentials more thoroughly. As we discussed strategy, Samuel arrived. With additional news, his investigation into the witnesses had hit an immediate red flag. Neither Catherine Phillips nor James Wilson appeared in any local records, property tax listings, voter registrations, or business directories from the relevant period. Either these individuals were passing through town exactly when needed to witness multiple significant property transfers, he explained, or the names are fictitious. I'm inclined toward the latter conclusion. By early afternoon, our small group had expanded to include Harriet Chen, a retired journalist who had profiled my grandmother for a feature on women philanthropists, and Detective Marcus Washington, Claire's husband, whose expertise in financial crimes offered valuable perspective on the legal implications of the case. Document everything, Marcus advised. Every conversation, every discovery. Create a timeline of events both before and after the suspicious transfers. And secure any physical evidence you've already found. Robert already knows you're staying here, I guarantee it. His words proved prophetic. As we strategized, Megan received a call from her front desk manager. Robert Caldwell was in the lobby, asking to speak with me. He's alone? I clarified, my pulse quickening. Just him, Megan confirmed after checking with her staff. After a moment's deliberation, I nodded. I'll see him. Better to know what he's thinking than wonder. We'll be right in the next room, Claire assured me, her expression firm. Robert entered the private dining room with the confident stride of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. His surprise at finding me calm and composed rather than emotional or flustered was briefly visible before his practiced smile reasserted itself. Alexandra, I was concerned when the housekeeper said you hadn't been home last night. This is quite an unusual arrangement for a sabbatical. His gaze swept dismissively over my notes and laptop. I needed a quiet place to think after learning my family home had been sold without my knowledge. I replied evenly. What brings you here, Uncle Robert? A courtesy, actually. I've arranged for professional archivists to assist with grandmother's papers. They'll be cataloging everything properly before items are distributed or preserved. No need for you to continue handling that alone. The transparent attempt to remove me from access to potential evidence might have intimidated me days earlier. Now, supported by a growing circle of allies and increasingly confident in our investigation, I felt only a calm resolve. How thoughtful. I assume they're the same professionals who were searching the study at midnight, the ones Jeffrey instructed to bring all documents directly to you? A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he recovered. I don't know. What you're imagining, Alexandra? Jeffrey mentioned hiring some assistance with the larger furniture inventory, but let's not pretend, Uncle Robert. I know about the fraudulent property transfers. I know grandmother was in Boston the day she supposedly signed over Oak Ridge. And I know you're desperately trying to eliminate evidence before the sale to Meridian can be questioned. For a moment, Robert's carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing a flash of cold calculation that confirmed every suspicion. Then, just as quickly, his expression shifted to patronizing concern. You're under tremendous stress, clearly. Emotional attachment to childhood places can cloud rational thinking. Perhaps we should discuss this when you're more composed. I'm perfectly composed, I replied, and I'm not alone in this investigation. Samuel Winters, the County Commission, the Historical Preservation Committee, they're all examining the suspicious circumstances surrounding these property transfers and the rushed sale to Meridian. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Be very careful, Alexandra. Unfounded accusations of fraud can have serious legal consequences. For someone with an academic career to protect, reckless allegations would be particularly unwise. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between us. In that moment, I recognized that the uncle I had known throughout my childhood, stern, but ostensibly family-minded, was a carefully constructed persona. The man before me was a stranger capable of defrauding his own mother and threatening his niece to protect his schemes. I'm not making accusations, Uncle Robert. I'm investigating facts. And if those facts reveal wrongdoing, I'll pursue justice regardless of the consequences. Grandmother deserved better, and so does Oakridge. After he left, my allies returned to the room, having heard everything through the partially open door. "He's worried," Marcus observed. "Threats are the refuge of someone losing control of the narrative." "And he practically confirmed the fraud," Claire added. "That comment about being in Boston, you didn't specify which document or date, yet he immediately knew which signing you meant." I nodded, experiencing a curious calm despite the confrontation. "He thinks I'm still the accommodating niece who avoids conflict at all costs. He has no idea what I'm capable of when fighting for something that matters." "Well," Megan said with a determined smile, "I think it's time we show him exactly what we're all capable of." The Amberley Historical Society occupied a stately federal-style building on Maple Street, its brick facade and white columns projecting permanence and authority. As Martin Rodriguez led me through the research archives in the basement, the musty scent of preserved documents and aging leather bindings reminded me of countless hours spent in similar repositories during my academic career. But this time, I wasn't researching distant historical figures. I was hunting for evidence that might save my family's legacy. "Most of Amberley's architectural documentation is here," Martin explained, unlocking a climate-controlled room filled with flat file cabinets. "Your grandmother donated funds for this preservation system 10 years ago, actually. She understood the importance of maintaining physical records even in the digital age." "That sounds like her," I smiled, remembering grandmother's insistence that certain things, handwritten letters, original blueprints, physical photographs, contained authenticity that digital versions couldn't replicate. Martin pulled out a large drawer and carefully lifted a folder labeled Oakridge Manor, Original Architectural Drawings, 1890. "Your great-grandfather commissioned Isaiah McIntyre at the height of his career," he explained, gently unfolding the yellowed blueprints. "These are the original plans, showing not just the main house but the complete estate design, gardens, outbuildings, even the underground infrastructure." I leaned over the detailed drawings, marveling at their precision and artistic quality. My architectural knowledge was limited to what I'd absorbed through my historical research, but even I could appreciate the extraordinary care reflected in these plans. "McIntyre was decades ahead of his contemporaries," Martin continued, pointing to specific features. "He integrated innovative heating systems, natural ventilation principles, and structural techniques that weren't common in residential architecture until much later." "Is this enough to support historical designation?" I asked, hopeful that the architectural significance might provide immediate protection. Martin's expression grew serious. "It certainly strengthens the case, but Meridian has successfully fought similar designations by arguing that interior historical features can be documented and then demolished. They're notorious for preserving just enough of a facade to claim historical sensitivity while essentially building entirely new structures." My heart sank. "So the architectural significance alone won't stop them?" "Not immediately, but—" Martin paused, studying a notation on the blueprint's margin. "That's interesting." "What?" "This notation here, in McIntyre's handwriting. It references something called secondary foundation documentation and a subterranean design element not shown in the main plans." He frowned, tracing the elegant script with his finger. "I've studied McIntyre's work extensively, and I've never seen a reference like this before." "Could there be additional blueprints?" I asked. "Possibly. Or it could refer to some feature of the estate that was documented separately." Martin moved to another drawer, pulling out more recent surveys of Oakridge. Nothing in the 1952 renovation documentation mentions unusual foundation elements, nor does the county survey from 1978. The mystery of McIntyre's notation lingered in my mind as we continued our research. By mid-afternoon, we had compiled substantial documentation of Oak Ridge's architectural significance, but nothing that would provide immediate protection against Meridian's planned demolition. As we prepared to leave, the Historical Society's elderly archivist, Dr. Lillian Parker, approached with an archival box. "Martin mentioned you were researching Oak Ridge," she said, placing the box on the table. "This arrived last month from an estate sale in Boston, materials from Isaiah McIntyre's personal collection. We haven't fully cataloged it yet, but there might be something relevant to your research." Inside the box lay a leather portfolio containing correspondence, sketches, and notes from McIntyre's 50-year career. Most items appeared unrelated to Oak Ridge, until I discovered a small notebook labeled Special Commissions, Confidential. Designs. Several pages in, I found what we were seeking: detailed drawings of an underground chamber beneath Oak Ridge's east wing, with the heading Commissioned Security Vault, Caldwell Estate. The drawing showed a concealed room approximately 15 feet square, accessible through a hidden entrance in the library floor. "This is extraordinary," Martin whispered, examining the plans. A completely concealed vault, built into the original foundation, but omitted from the main blueprints. This kind of feature was incredibly rare in residential architecture of that period. The question is, does it still exist? I wondered aloud. And if so, what might be inside? The possibility of a hidden vault within Oak Ridge, potentially undisturbed for generations, sent a surge of excitement through me. If my great-grandfather had created a secure storage space unknown to subsequent generations, could it contain documents relevant to the estate's ownership? Or at least historical materials that might strengthen our case for preservation? That evening, our expanding group of allies gathered at the Preston House Inn to share developments and coordinate strategy. Samuel had made progress tracking the mysterious notary, discovering that Thomas Beckman's notary license in Essex County had been issued just 3 weeks before the suspicious property transfers and had expired shortly afterward without renewal. "A temporary notary commission, used briefly and then abandoned," Samuel explained. "Highly suggestive of a created identity for a specific purpose." Claire Bennett reported that her contacts at the county commission had placed a temporary hold on demolition permits for the Oak Ridge property, citing concerns about proper environmental impact studies. "It's not permanent," she cautioned, "but it buys us a few weeks beyond your original deadline." I shared our discovery of the potential hidden vault, which generated immediate interest. "If this vault exists and contains historical documents," Martin explained, "it could significantly strengthen our preservation case. Undisturbed historical features with original contents would elevate Oak Ridge's significance considerably. But we need to confirm its existence and access it before Meridian's people go through the house," Claire pointed out. "Once they begin interior assessment, anything valuable could disappear." Detective Marcus Washington, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. "This creates a legitimate reason to request formal access to the property. As a direct descendant, with personal items still in the house, Alexandra has grounds to demand supervised entry, particularly if there's concern about historically significant features being disturbed." "Robert will fight it," I pointed out. "Let him," Samuel replied with unexpected vigor. "A public objection to you simply retrieving personal belongings would raise questions about his motives. Besides, we don't need his permission to request a formal inspection based on the historical documentation we've discovered." The next morning, Samuel filed emergency motions with the county court requesting both a formal inspection of Oak Ridge based on newly discovered historical documentation and a temporary restraining order preventing any interior modifications until ownership questions were resolved. Simultaneously, Martin submitted an expedited application for historical review based on McIntyre's original designs and the potential hidden architectural feature. Robert's response was swift and aggressive. By afternoon, his attorneys had filed counter-motions dismissing our claims as desperate attempts to delay legitimate business proceedings, and characterizing me as an emotionally attached relative, unable to accept necessary family financial decisions. The judge assigned to the case, Eleanor Blackwell, scheduled an emergency hearing for the following morning. As we prepared our presentation, Samuel received concerning news from his courthouse contacts. Judge Blackwell had received substantial campaign contributions from development interests associated with Meridian's parent company. "This doesn't automatically mean she'll rule against us," Samuel cautioned when I expressed alarm, "but we should be prepared for an unsympathetic hearing." That night, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, I found myself poring over McIntyre's vault diagrams again. According to his notes, the entrance was concealed beneath a specific section of library flooring, marked by a subtle pattern variation in the inlaid wood. I had spent countless hours in that library throughout my life without noticing anything unusual about the floor. But I had never been looking for hidden features either. A thought struck me. If the vault existed and had remained sealed for generations, perhaps my grandmother hadn't known about it either. Yet she had meticulously documented every other aspect of Oak Ridge's history. I opened my laptop and searched through my digital catalog of her papers until I found what I was looking for: her handwritten inventory of Oak Ridge's architectural features, compiled during the extensive restoration she had overseen in the 1980s. There, on page 17, was a curious notation. "Eastern Library flooring shows evidence of previous modification. Craftsman report section appears original but was installed separately from main flooring. Historical purpose unclear." She had noticed something unusual but hadn't discovered its significance. The vault might indeed remain intact and undisturbed. The next morning, we assembled at the courthouse, our small team now bolstered by several community members who had learned of the dispute through Claire's network. Robert arrived with an imposing entourage, his 3 children, 2 partners from Harrison and Boyd, and a representative from Meridian Development who I recognized from industry publications as Victor Hargrove, their CEO. Judge Blackwell entered, promptly at 9, her stern demeanor offering no hints about her predisposition. After establishing the basic facts of the case, she addressed the key questions directly. "The court recognizes 2 separate but potentially related issues," she began. "First, the request for property inspection based on historical documentation, and second, the more complex question of potentially fraudulent property transfers which might affect current ownership claims. Let's address the inspection request first." Robert's attorney argued that allowing me access could compromise the integrity of the property prior to transfer, and dismissed the vault documentation as speculative historical trivia, irrelevant to the legitimate sale. When my turn came, I presented McIntyre's drawings alongside my grandmother's notation about the unusual flooring. "Your Honor, this evidence suggests a historically significant architectural feature that has remained undocumented in modern surveys. As Oak Ridge faces potential demolition, proper documentation of all historical elements is essential, regardless of how ownership questions are ultimately resolved." To my surprise, Martin Rodriguez was permitted to testify about the architectural significance of such a feature. "Hidden vaults of this nature are extremely rare in American residential architecture of this period," he explained. "If intact, it would represent a unique historical element worthy of preservation in its own right." After brief deliberation, Judge Blackwell issued her first ruling. The court grants permission for a limited inspection to document the potential historical feature identified in these architectural drawings. The inspection will be conducted by qualified historical preservationists, with representatives from both parties present, and supervised by a court-appointed observer. It was a small victory, but significant. We had gained legitimate access to Oak Ridge. Robert's barely concealed frustration confirmed we had overcome his first attempt to block our investigation. The judge continued, addressing the more complicated ownership questions. Regarding allegations of fraudulent property transfers, this court recognizes the seriousness of such claims, but requires substantial evidence before intervening in completed transactions. The preliminary documentation presented suggests irregularities, worthy of further investigation, but falls short of conclusive proof of fraud. She paused, studying the competing attorneys thoughtfully. Therefore, I am ordering a 30-day stay on any permanent alterations to the property while discovery proceeds regarding the circumstances of the transfers to Caldwell Family Holdings. This stay specifically prohibits demolition or structural modifications, but does not prevent Meridian Development from conducting non-invasive assessments consistent with their purchase agreement. It wasn't everything we had hoped for, but it was far better than we had feared. The 30-day reprieve gave us critical time to search for more definitive evidence while preventing immediate destruction of Oak Ridge. As we left the courtroom, Victor Hargrove approached me directly, his expensive suit and carefully cultivated silver fox appearance projecting corporate authority. "Ms. Caldwell, a moment?" His practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. "I admire your passion for family history, truly. But Meridian has invested considerably in this acquisition, and delays directly impact our investors and development timeline." "I understand business concerns, Mr. Hargrove," I replied evenly. "But I also understand fraud when I see it. If your company knowingly purchased property with questionable provenance, that's a problem of your own making." His smile tightened. "We conducted thorough due diligence. The transfers to Caldwell Family Holdings appeared entirely legitimate." "Appeared" being the operative word, I noted. "Perhaps your due diligence wasn't as thorough as you claim." Something flickered in his expression, a momentary uncertainty that suggested he might not have been fully informed about potential irregularities in the property's history. "If evidence of actual fraud emerges," he said carefully, "Meridian would naturally reevaluate its position. We have no interest in entangling ourselves in family disputes or questionable transactions. However, until such evidence appears, we will proceed according to our legal rights under the purchase agreement." As he walked away to join Robert's group, Samuel appeared at my side. "Interesting exchange," he observed quietly. "He's leaving himself room to maneuver if our investigation proves fruitful." "You think he suspects Robert might have misrepresented the situation?" "Corporations like Meridian are ultimately pragmatic," Samuel replied. "If defending this purchase becomes more costly than abandoning it, financially or reputationally, they'll cut their losses and likely seek damages from Robert personally." For the first time since discovering the impending demolition of Oak Ridge, I felt a genuine sense of possibility. We hadn't yet saved the estate, but we had gained time, access, and potentially created the first crack in the alliance between Robert and Meridian. The court-supervised inspection was scheduled for the following day. As I prepared to finally return to Oak Ridge after days of exile, I wondered what secrets might lie beneath those library floorboards, and whether they might hold the key to preserving not just a house, but the truth about my family's legacy. The morning of the inspection dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air as our assembled group gathered on Oak Ridge's gravel driveway. Court Officer Patricia Daniels, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, reviewed the inspection parameters with clipped efficiency. "The court order permits examination only of the specific area identified in the historical documentation," she reminded us, consulting her clipboard. "Any discoveries must be photographed and documented in my presence. No items may be removed without explicit court permission." Our team consisted of Martin Rodriguez, 2 preservationists from the State Historical Commission, Samuel, and myself. Robert had assembled his own contingent, his attorney Edward Harrison, Jeffrey, a representative from Meridian named Thomas Collins, and surprisingly, a structural engineer who was introduced as Dr. Patel. The engineer's presence seems excessive. For documenting a historical feature, Samuel commented quietly as we entered through Oak Ridge's imposing front doors. They're already planning the demolition, I replied, noting how Collins and the engineer exchanged whispers while studying the entry hall's vaulted ceiling. They want to know if this vault might complicate their construction timeline. The library remained exactly as I had left it days earlier, my research materials still scattered across the large oak table. Robert made a point of gesturing toward the disorganized state of the room, suggesting to Officer Daniels that I had been haphazardly disturbing historical materials. I bit back a sharp retort, reminding myself that our purpose today was far more important than defending my research methods. Instead, I focused on the task at hand, unrolling McIntyre's detailed drawings of the vault's location. According to the plans, the hidden entrance lay beneath the eastern section of the library, where built-in bookshelves lined the wall and a slightly raised area created a natural reading nook. The inlaid wood flooring featured an intricate pattern of alternating maple and walnut, creating geometric designs that had always struck me as particularly beautiful. Martin knelt to examine the floor, running his fingers along the seams between hardwood pieces. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary," he murmured. "If there is a concealed entrance, it's been masterfully integrated into the original design." For nearly 30 minutes, our team methodically inspected the flooring, comparing McIntyre's drawings to the actual room dimensions and looking for any indication of a hidden mechanism. Robert's impatience grew visibly, his sighs and glances at his watch becoming increasingly theatrical. "This appears to be a waste of the court's time," Edward Harrison finally announced. "Perhaps Ms. Caldwell's historical discovery is nothing more than architectural fantasy." Just as my own doubts began to surface, Martin called out from behind the central reading desk. "There's something different about this section," he said, pointing to an area where the geometric pattern subtly deviated from the surrounding floor. "The inlay creates a perfect square, approximately 5 feet on each side." The preservationists joined him, murmuring in agreement as they traced the barely perceptible outline. According to McIntyre's drawings, this should be the access point, but how did it open? "The plans mention a concealed mechanism integrated into the surrounding architecture," I said, studying the drawings again. "Something connected to the building itself, not a traditional lock or handle." My eyes swept the nearby bookshelves, which McIntyre had also designed as part of the original library. One shelf contained a series of leather-bound classics, their gold-embossed spines gleaming in the morning light. I had spent countless childhood hours in this library, often curled in this very nook with books from these shelves. A memory surfaced. My grandfather showing me his first edition Dickens collection, explaining how the custom bookcase had been designed with subtle features to protect the valuable volumes. Slight recessing to avoid direct sunlight, specialized shelving angles to reduce binding stress. "The books," I whispered, moving toward the shelf. "They're part of the mechanism." Robert scoffed openly. "Now we're in the realm of childish fantasy. Secret passages opened by pulling the right book?" Ignoring him, I examined the shelves more carefully. If McIntyre had designed a concealed mechanism, it would be elegant and integrated into the room's regular use, not obvious or theatrical. My attention fixed on a small bronze plaque affixed to one shelf, engraved with a quote I had read hundreds of times without truly considering its significance. "In books lies the soul of the whole past time." It was attributed to my great-grandfather, though I knew the words actually belonged to Carlyle. The plaque was mounted on a small wooden panel that protruded slightly from the surrounding shelf. Tentatively, I pressed against it. Nothing happened. Then I tried sliding it to the right. Still nothing. But when I applied pressure and pushed upward, the panel moved with a soft click. Immediately, a barely audible mechanical sound emanated from beneath the floor, followed by a soft hiss of releasing pressure. Before our astonished eyes, the square section of flooring Martin had identified recessed slightly, then slid sideways, to reveal a dark opening and the top of a narrow spiral staircase descending into shadows. "My God," Martin breathed. "It's exactly as the drawings indicated. A completely concealed entrance, functional after more than a century." Officer Daniels stepped forward, suddenly alert. "No one enters until we've properly documented this discovery and ensured structural safety," she declared, already photographing the opening with her county-issued camera. Dr. Patel conducted a preliminary assessment, confirming that the staircase appeared structurally sound, constructed from steel supports with stone treads. After nearly 45 minutes of documentation and safety checks, Officer Daniels finally authorized a limited inspection of the vault itself. "Only Mr. Rodriguez and Ms. Caldwell will descend," she ruled. "The space may not safely accommodate more individuals, and their expertise is most relevant to proper documentation." Robert immediately objected. "My family has equal interest in any discoveries. Jeffrey should accompany them." "Mr. Caldwell, the court order specifies minimal disruption to potential historical features," Officer Daniels replied firmly. "2 individuals is the maximum I will authorize for initial inspection. Armed with powerful flashlights, Martin and—" I carefully descended the narrow spiral staircase, counting 23 steps before reaching a small landing. Before us stood a heavy metal door with no visible handle or lock, just a small circular indentation where a keyhole might normally be positioned. "Another puzzle," Martin murmured, examining the door's construction. "Extraordinarily sophisticated for residential architecture of this period." I studied the circular indentation, noting its unusual depth and diameter. Something about its dimensions triggered another memory. A pendant my grandmother had always worn. A simple silver disc engraved with the Caldwell family crest. She had called it her heritage token, and mentioned it had belonged to her father-in-law. "I know what this is," I said suddenly. "It's not a keyhole. It's designed for a medallion." "Do you have this medallion?" Martin asked. "No, but I know where it might be." I turned and called up the staircase, explaining the situation to Officer Daniels. After consultation with Samuel, she permitted me to retrieve items from my grandmother's personal effects, which had been boxed and stored in her bedroom following her death. Under Robert's increasingly agitated observation, I located the rosewood jewelry box that had sat on grandmother's dresser for decades. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay the silver medallion exactly as I remembered, approximately 2 inches in diameter, engraved with the oak tree and shield of the Caldwell crest. Returning to the vault entrance, I carefully inserted the medallion into the circular indentation. It fit perfectly, and with a gentle clockwise turn, a series of internal mechanisms activated. The heavy door swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a chamber approximately 15 feet square, its walls lined with metal shelving and wooden filing cabinets. The air that escaped was cool and dry, with that distinctive scent of old paper and leather that permeates rarely accessed archives. As our flashlight beams swept the room, the contents came into focus. Dozens of document boxes, stacks of leather portfolios, small locked chests, and in the center, a massive oak table with a leather-bound ledger prominently displayed. "This is extraordinary," Martin whispered, his professional demeanor momentarily overcome by wonder. "A completely preserved time capsule, untouched for decades, possibly a century." We carefully approached the central table, where the ledger lay open to a page headed Caldwell Family Holdings, Foundational Trusts and Entailments. My flashlight illuminated handwritten entries dating back to 1892, detailing the establishment of various family trusts and property designations. "This appears to be a master record of the original family estate planning," I said, carefully photographing each page while Martin documented the vault's contents. My great-grandfather created elaborate provisions for how Oak Ridge and other properties should be maintained and transferred through generations. As we systematically examined the vault's contents, a coherent picture emerged. My great-grandfather, apparently distrustful of conventional legal systems and concerned about potential challenges to his carefully structured legacy, had created this secure repository for the family's most important documents. Original deeds, trust instruments, personal correspondence regarding his intentions, and detailed instructions for future generations. Most significantly, we discovered a leather portfolio labeled Perpetual Trusts, Oak Ridge Estate, containing documents that established an irrevocable trust specifically protecting the main house and surrounding 5 acres from sale or substantial modification without unanimous consent of all living direct descendants. If these documents are legally valid, Martin said, carefully photographing each page, they would supersede any subsequent transfers that didn't meet these specific conditions. Which would make Robert's transfer to the holding company invalid, I added, my heart racing with the implications of our discovery. And the sale to Meridian would collapse. After nearly 2 hours in the vault, Officer Daniels insisted we conclude our initial inspection. We had documented dozens of potentially significant documents but had examined only a fraction of the vault's contents. The most critical findings, the trust documents and original deed restrictions, were photographed extensively and recorded in the official court record. As we emerged from the library, Robert's expression had transformed from impatient dismissal to barely controlled fury. He huddled with his attorney while Jeffrey paced nervously nearby. The Meridian representative appeared intensely interested in our findings, peppering Officer Daniels with questions she professionally deflected. The court will receive a complete report of today's inspection, she informed the assembled group. All parties are prohibited from accessing the identified historical feature until Judge Blackwell issues further guidance. Ms. Caldwell, please secure the mechanism. After restoring the library floor to its original appearance, we gathered our materials to depart. As I collected my notes, Victor Hargrove himself appeared in the library doorway, apparently summoned by his colleague. Ms. Caldwell, he said, his corporate charm notably strained, I understand you've made quite a discovery. Perhaps we should discuss potential implications privately. Any discussions will include my attorney, I replied, nodding toward Samuel, and should wait until the court has reviewed today's findings. Hargrove's calculated smile tightened. Meridian has invested significantly in this property based on clear title representations from Caldwell Family Holdings. If there are complications regarding those representations, our issue would be with Mr. Robert Caldwell, not with you directly. The implied shift in allegiance wasn't subtle. Hargrove was already positioning Meridian to extricate itself from the situation while placing responsibility squarely on Robert. How convenient, I observed. Unfortunately, my concern isn't assigning blame but preserving Oak Ridge according to my grandmother's wishes. The documents we've discovered suggest that should have been everyone's priority all along. As we left Oak Ridge that afternoon, I felt a profound sense of vindication mixed with wonder at what we had uncovered. My great-grandfather, anticipating potential threats to his carefully constructed legacy, had created not just a physical vault, but a legal fortress protecting Oak Ridge from precisely the kind of manipulation Robert had attempted. Samuel was already consulting with colleagues specializing in trust law, examining the implications of our discoveries. These documents potentially create a completely different legal framework for Oak Ridge, he explained as we drove back to town. If the perpetual trust was properly established and never legally dissolved, it would supersede all subsequent attempts to transfer the property without meeting the specific conditions outlined in the trust instrument, which would make Robert's transfers fraudulent not just in execution but in fundamental concept, I concluded. Precisely. He couldn't legitimately transfer what was never his to control, regardless of how the documents were executed. The implications were staggering. Not only had we uncovered evidence suggesting forged signatures and fabricated witnesses, but we had potentially discovered that the entire legal basis for Robert's actions was invalid from the start. As word of our discoveries spread through our growing network of allies, a palpable sense of momentum began building. Claire immediately initiated the process for securing formal historical protection based on the unique architectural feature and its intact contents. Martin contacted colleagues at several universities, building academic support for preserving the site for scholarly research. Megan organized local business owners concerned about Meridian's development plans, creating a unified community voice advocating for Oak Ridge's preservation. That evening, as our core team gathered at the Preston House to review the day's discoveries and plan next steps, I was struck by how much had changed in just over a week. What had begun as my solitary grief over losing a beloved family home had transformed into a community-wide movement with implications far beyond Oak Ridge itself. What you've uncovered isn't just about saving one historic estate, Claire observed as we reviewed the trust documents. It's about challenging the EO assumption that development always trumps preservation, that profit inevitably outweighs heritage. That's why so many people have rallied to this cause. Looking around at these dedicated allies, some lifelong friends, others new connections united by shared values, I realized that regardless of the legal outcome, something precious had already been saved. The recognition that some places deserve protection not because of their market value, but because of the memories, history, and community identity they contain. The battle for Oak Ridge was far from over. Robert would undoubtedly fight these discoveries with every legal maneuver available. But for the first time since receiving the devastating news of the estate's sale, I felt absolute certainty that I was fighting not just for a house, but for principles worth defending regardless of personal 3 days after our discovery of the hidden vault. Judge Blackwell called an emergency hearing to address the extraordinary findings at Oak Ridge. The county courthouse's largest courtroom was filled to capacity. Our growing coalition of supporters, numerous members of the press alerted by Claire's media contacts, and an expanded legal team representing both Robert and Meridian Development. As I entered alongside Samuel, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Robert sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by attorneys from Harrison and Boyd, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional concern. Though he nodded curtly in my direction, the cold calculation in his eyes revealed his true sentiments. Judge Blackwell entered and immediately established the hearing's purpose. The court has reviewed the extensive documentation from the inspection of Oak Ridge Manor, including photographic evidence of numerous historical documents discovered in a previously unknown architectural feature. Given the potential legal significance of these findings, I've determined an immediate hearing is necessary before proceeding with any further action regarding the property. Samuel presented our case first, methodically explaining the significance of what we'd discovered. Using a digital presentation prepared with Martin's assistance, he displayed key excerpts from the trust documents establishing the Oak Ridge Perpetual Conservation Trust, created by my great-grandfather in 1892. Your Honor, these documents reveal a legally binding trust specifically designed to prevent precisely the kind of transfer and development currently being attempted, Samuel explained. The trust explicitly requires unanimous consent from all living direct descendants before any substantive changes to the estate can occur, a condition clearly not met in this case. Robert's lead attorney, Bradford Mills, immediately objected. Your Honor, these purported historical documents have not been authenticated. They could be forgeries, fabrications, or simply outdated papers superseded by subsequent legal arrangements. An interesting objection, Judge Blackwell noted with raised eyebrows. Given that similar questions have been raised about the property transfers to Caldwell Family Holdings. For the next 2 hours, the hearing proceeded with intensive examination of both the recently discovered trust documents and the suspicious property transfers Robert had orchestrated. Expert witnesses testified about the authentication of century-old documents, the continuity of trust law, and the specific irregularities in the transfers to Caldwell Family Holdings. Throughout this process, I observed Robert's demeanor gradually, shifting from confident dismissal to growing unease as the weight of evidence accumulated against him. When Judge Blackwell called a brief recess, I noticed Robert in intense discussion with Victor Hargrove, their body language suggesting significant disagreement. Samuel leaned closer, following my gaze. "Meridian is likely reconsidering their position," he whispered. "Their legal exposure increases substantially if they proceed with a development knowingly based on fraudulent transfers." When the hearing resumed, a surprising development occurred. Bradford Mills requested permission to confer privately with his client before continuing. After a 10-minute consultation in a side room, they returned with Victor Hargrove now seated at their table. "Your Honor," Mills began, his tone noticeably shifted, "in light of information disclosed during this hearing, Meridian Development wishes to address the court directly regarding their position on the Oak Ridge acquisition." Judge Blackwell granted permission, and Hargrove approached the podium with practiced corporate poise. "Your Honor, Meridian Development entered into the purchase agreement for Oak Ridge Manor in good faith, based on representations from Caldwell Family Holdings that they possessed clear title to the property. The documents revealed during yesterday's inspection raised significant questions about those representations." He paused, glancing meaningfully toward Robert. "While we maintain that Meridian conducted appropriate due diligence before purchase, we cannot ignore evidence suggesting the property may be encumbered by previously undisclosed trust restrictions. Therefore, Meridian formally requests the court's permission to withdraw from the purchase agreement pending resolution of these ownership questions, with full reservation of our right to seek appropriate remedies from Caldwell Family Holdings for any misrepresentations." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Hargrove had effectively abandoned Robert, prioritizing Meridian's legal and reputational protection over the development opportunity. Robert's face flushed with barely controlled anger as his primary business partner publicly distanced themselves from his actions. Judge Blackwell considered this request thoughtfully before responding. "The court acknowledges Meridian Development's position. Given the significant questions raised about the property's legal status, suspending the purchase agreement pending further investigation seems prudent and is hereby approved." She then turned her attention to the broader implications of our discoveries. "The documents found in the Oak Ridge Vault appear to establish a perpetual conservation trust with specific requirements for property decisions. While further authentication is warranted, preliminary examination suggests these documents may indeed create binding restrictions that would invalidate subsequent transfers made without meeting the trust conditions." Robert's attorney immediately raised objections about the enforceability of century-old trust provisions, arguing that modern property law provided mechanisms for modifying outdated restrictions. However, Samuel countered with precedents specifically upholding perpetual conservation trusts when properly established, particularly when subsequent actions showed clear intent to circumvent rather than legally modify the original provisions. After considering both arguments, Judge Blackwell issued her ruling. "The court hereby extends the stay on any physical alterations to Oak Ridge Manor indefinitely, pending full authentication of the trust documents and comprehensive review of their legal implications. Additionally, given the serious questions raised about the validity of transfers to Caldwell Family Holdings, those transactions are suspended pending investigation." She fixed Robert with a stern gaze. "Mr. Caldwell, the evidence presented today raises troubling questions about the methods used to transfer properties formerly belonging to Eleanor Caldwell. This court takes allegations of document falsification extremely seriously. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation." The courtroom fell silent as the implications of her words registered. Judge Blackwell wasn't just halting the development. She was opening the door to potential criminal charges against Robert for fraud and document falsification. As the hearing concluded, reporters surrounded us seeking comments about the dramatic Developments. Samuel fielded most questions with professional restraint, emphasizing that our primary concern remained honoring my grandmother's wishes for Oak Ridge's preservation. When asked directly about my reaction to the potential criminal investigation of my uncle, I chose my words carefully. This case has never been about personal conflict. It's about upholding principles of honesty, preserving important historical heritage, and ensuring that legal processes are respected. Whatever consequences come from that pursuit of truth, I stand by our decision to bring these issues to light. As we departed the courthouse, Claire pulled me aside with exciting news. The State Historical Commission voted unanimously this morning to fast-track Oak Ridge's application for historical designation, based on Martin's documentation of the vault and its contents. Once formalized, that designation would provide another layer of protection against future development attempts. This additional victory reinforced the growing momentum of our preservation efforts. What had begun as my solitary stand against seemingly insurmountable odds had evolved into a multifaceted campaign with legal, historical, and community dimensions all aligned toward saving Oak Ridge. Later that afternoon, as our team celebrated these developments at the Preston House, an unexpected visitor arrived. Jeffrey, Robert's oldest son, requested to speak with me privately. Though surprised by his appearance, I agreed to meet him in Megan's office away from the main gathering. "I owe you an apology," he began awkwardly, his usual confidence notably absent. "I didn't know about the forged documents or the hidden trust. Dad kept the details of the transfers from all of us, just saying it was standard estate planning grandmother had agreed to." His apparent sincerity surprised me. "You never questioned why grandmother would suddenly agree to arrangements that would lead to Oak Ridge's destruction, after she spent her entire life preserving it?" Jeffrey looked genuinely uncomfortable. Dad said her health was declining, that she wanted to simplify things while she still could. I should have questioned it more, but he trailed off, then admitted, "It was easier to believe what he told us." "Why are you here now?" I asked directly. "The district attorney's office contacted me this morning. They're scheduling interviews with everyone involved in the Caldwell family holdings transactions." He hesitated, then continued more quietly. "But that's not the only reason. Seeing that vault, the care your great-grandfather took to protect Oak Ridge for future generations, it made me realize I've been complicit in something that goes against our family's true legacy." His unexpected moment of reflection seemed genuine, though I remained cautious about his motivations. "What are you suggesting, Jeffrey?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted, "but I want to help fix this somehow. I have documents from the formation of Caldwell family holdings that might help establish exactly how the fraudulent transfers were executed. And I'm willing to testify about conversations with my father regarding his plans for the properties." This offer potentially provided crucial evidence for both the civil case and any criminal investigation. However, I recognized the personal cost such testimony would exact. Jeffrey would essentially be providing evidence against his own father. "Have you considered what this might mean for your relationship with Robert?" I asked. A flash of pain crossed his face. "Yes, but I've also considered what it means to be part of this family. Grandmother always said the Caldwell name came with responsibilities, not just privileges. I haven't honored that very well." His words echoed my own journey over the past 2 weeks, from viewing myself as powerless against Robert's machinations to recognizing my responsibility to protect our shared heritage. Jeffrey seemed to be undergoing a similar, if belated, realization. "If you're serious about helping, Samuel would be the person to speak with about your evidence," I told him. "But Jeffrey, this has to be your decision, made for the right reasons. Not just because you see which way the legal winds are blowing." He nodded, acknowledging the justified skepticism. "I understand, and I don't expect instant trust. But I want to be on the right side of this, even if it's late." after Jeffrey departed to meet with Samuel, I rejoined our celebration, sharing this unexpected development with Claire and Megan. Their reactions mirrored my own cautious optimism. Jeffrey's cooperation could significantly strengthen our position, though. His motivations remained somewhat unclear. "People sometimes surprise you," Megan observed, "especially when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Or when they see someone else standing firmly for principles they've neglected," Claire added, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze. As evening settled over Amberley, I stepped onto the inn's wide porch to gather my thoughts. The past 2 weeks had transformed not just the fate of Oakridge, but my understanding of myself. The quiet academic who had always avoided confrontation had discovered an unexpected capacity for advocacy, strategic thinking, and resilient determination when defending something truly meaningful. My phone chimed with a message from Martin. State Historical Commission officially approved Oakridge's preliminary designation. Formal protection protocols now in effect. Another layer of security for the estate, another validation of our efforts. Looking toward the hills where Oakridge stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, I felt a profound connection to the generations of Caldwells who had safeguarded that legacy before me, particularly my great-grandfather, whose foresight in creating both physical and legal protections had ultimately foiled Robert's schemes a century later. The battle wasn't completely won. Authentication of the trust documents would take time, and Robert would undoubtedly continue fighting through every available legal channel. The criminal investigation might or might not result in charges, but the immediate threat of demolition had been averted, and each day brought new allies, additional protections, and stronger legal positions supporting Oakridge's preservation. More importantly, this struggle had revealed the power of principled persistence against seemingly overwhelming odds. By refusing to accept Robert's initial pronouncement as final, by methodically gathering evidence and building alliances, by standing firmly for values beyond mere financial calculation, we had changed what once appeared to be an inevitable outcome. As I contemplated these developments, Samuel joined me on the porch, his expression suggesting additional news. "Jeffrey's documents are potentially decisive," he confirmed. "They include internal communications explicitly acknowledging that Eleanor never approved the transfers and discussing methods to circumvent her wishes. If authenticated, they provide clear evidence of fraudulent intent." "Will Jeffrey really testify against his own father?" I asked. Samuel nodded solemnly. He seems genuinely determined to correct this situation, whatever the personal cost. People are sometimes capable of surprising courage when finally confronted with the full implications of choices they've participated in. This observation resonated deeply with my own experience of the past weeks, discovering courage I hadn't known I possessed when the stakes became sufficiently meaningful. Perhaps Jeffrey was experiencing a similar awakening, albeit from a very different starting point. As darkness enveloped Amberley, the lights of town creating a warm glow against the night sky, I reflected on how quickly perspectives can shift when we choose to stand firmly for our deepest values. What had initially seemed like the devastating loss of a beloved family home had become a catalyst for unexpected growth, community connection, and the discovery of hidden strength. Whatever challenges still lay ahead in securing Oakridge's future, I now faced them with confident determination rather than desperate hope. Transformed by the very struggle I had never wanted, but now recognized as profoundly necessary. Not just for preserving a house, but for honoring truth itself. 3 weeks after our courthouse victory, Oakridge was transformed from a house under threat to a center of community activity. The State Historical Commission's official designation had triggered a comprehensive documentation project, bringing historians, architects, and preservation specialists to the estate daily. The vault's contents, now carefully cataloged under Martin's supervision, had revealed additional historical treasures beyond the crucial trust documents, including original correspondence from notable figures of the 1890s, architectural sketches, for buildings never constructed, and detailed journals chronicling the early days of Amberley's development. Your great-grandfather wasn't just protecting his family's legacy, Martin explained as we examined a portfolio of hand-drawn community planning documents. He was preserving a vision for how the entire region might develop with attention to both natural resources and quality of life. Many of his concepts were remarkably forward-thinking for his era. These discoveries had attracted attention far beyond our local preservation efforts. The University of Massachusetts Architectural Heritage Program had expressed interest in establishing a research partnership centered on Oak Ridge, potentially creating both academic resources and sustainable funding for ongoing maintenance. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings continued advancing decisively in our favor. Judge Blackwell had appointed independent experts to authenticate the trust documents, and their preliminary findings strongly supported both their legitimacy and ongoing legal validity. Simultaneously, the district attorney's investigation into Robert's fraudulent transfers had expanded, bolstered substantially by Jeffrey's cooperation and the additional evidence he had provided. That morning, as I supervised the careful restoration of the library following weeks of examination and documentation, Samuel arrived with news that would fundamentally reshape our path forward. The authentication team has made their final determination, he announced, his typically measured demeanor giving way to genuine excitement. The Oak Ridge Perpetual Conservation Trust has been officially recognized as legally binding. According to their findings, the trust was properly established, never legally dissolved, and contains provisions specifically enforceable under both historical and current trust law. I set aside the catalog of rare books I'd been reviewing. What does this mean practically for Oak Ridge's status? It means several critical things, Samuel explained, sitting across from me at the library table. First, all purported transfers to Caldwell family holdings are now officially invalidated, as they violated the explicit terms of the trust. Second, ownership reverts to the trust itself, with management responsibilities falling to the designated trustees, which, according to the original documents, are the direct descendants of Eleanor Caldwell. Direct descendants, I repeated, considering the implications. That would include me, but also Robert, his children, and my cousins from Aunt Margaret's family. Samuel nodded. Yes, though with an important qualification. The trust specifies that trustees who attempt to violate its core provisions may be removed from management authority by unanimous vote of the remaining trustees. Given Robert's documented attempts to circumvent the trust through fraudulent transfers, there are strong grounds for his disqualification. This development created both opportunity and challenge. The trust's recognition created an unassailable legal foundation for Oak Ridge's protection, but the shared management responsibility raised new questions about how to move forward constructively with family members who had been on opposite sides of an increasingly bitter dispute. Have you spoken with Jeffrey about this? I asked, knowing he had continued providing evidence against his father despite significant personal cost. His cooperation had cost him his position at the family investment firm and created rifts with his siblings who remained loyal to Robert. Briefly this morning, Samuel confirmed. He seems genuinely committed to honoring the trust's purpose, moving forward. As for Christine and Michael, he referred to Jeffrey's younger siblings, their positions remain aligned with Robert, though they've been notably quiet since the criminal investigation expanded. The complex family dynamics had become increasingly painful as legal proceedings intensified. Robert now faced potential criminal charges for document falsification, fraud, and possibly witness tampering related to the notary and alleged witnesses. His combative strategy had gradually shifted to damage control, with his attorneys now focused more on mitigating legal consequences than continuing to pursue the invalidated property transfers. We need to find a path forward that honors the trust's purpose while allowing for healing where possible, I said after considering these developments. Fighting Robert was necessary to save Oak Ridge, but perpetuating conflict indefinitely serves no one. Samuel's expression softened. That's remarkably generous considering what you've been through, Alexandra. Many in your position would focus solely on vindication and consequences. Consequences are necessary, I acknowledged, particularly given the deliberate nature of Robert's actions. But my ultimate goal has always been preserving Oak Ridge and what it represents, not punishing family members. This perspective had crystallized gradually throughout our struggle. While the immediate battle had necessarily focused on stopping the demolition and exposing fraudulent activities, I increasingly recognized that true victory would require building something positive from the conflict, creating a sustainable future for Oak Ridge that honored its historical significance while serving meaningful contemporary purposes. That afternoon, I met with Claire, Martin, and representatives from the various organizations now interested in Oak Ridge's future. The library, once my solitary research space, had become our unofficial headquarters, its expansive table covered with proposals, architectural assessments, and funding models. The university partnership offers the most comprehensive support structure, Claire noted, reviewing the various options. Their proposed program would include preservation specialists, educational programming, and research opportunities while maintaining the estate's historical integrity. Martin added, they're particularly interested in the vault and its contents as a unique historical resource. Their proposal includes funding for proper archival facilities and ongoing documentation work. As we discussed these possibilities, an unexpected visitor arrived. Vanessa, Jeffrey's wife, who had once dismissively suggested I focus on smaller antiques when planning my eviction from Oak Ridge. Her hesitant demeanor now contrasted sharply with her previous confident entitlement. Jeffrey mentioned you were meeting about future plans, she explained awkwardly. I thought I might offer some input, if that's welcome. Though surprised by her appearance, I invited her to join us, curious about what she might contribute. Vanessa had a background in event planning that she had largely set aside after marrying Jeffrey, and I wondered if her interest reflected genuine engagement or simply an attempt to maintain connection to a property that would no longer be developed, as originally planned. Her initial comments revealed something more nuanced. The East Gardens have always been Oak Ridge's most photographed feature, she noted, referencing my grandmother's meticulous landscaping that had been featured in several design magazines. With proper restoration and management, they could host significant community and private events while generating sustainable income for ongoing maintenance. This practical suggestion reflected legitimate consideration of Oak Ridge's viable future, not just its preservation. As our discussion continued, Vanessa offered additional perspectives, balancing respectful preservation with functional use, approaches that might create financial sustainability without compromising historical integrity. Jeffrey and I have been doing considerable research on similar historical properties, she explained. The most successful models maintain authentic preservation while creating meaningful engagement opportunities. Purely static preservation often struggles with long-term funding and relevance. Her contributions highlighted an important dimension I had perhaps underemphasized in my focus on stopping the demolition, creating a vibrant, financially sustainable future for Oak Ridge, rather than simply preserving it as a static historical artifact. By the meeting's conclusion, Vanessa had proven herself a thoughtful, knowledgeable participant whose perspectives genuinely enhanced our planning process. As others departed, Vanessa lingered, clearly wanting to speak privately. When we were alone, she addressed the elephant in the room directly. I owe you an apology, Alexandra. My behavior when we first discussed the sale was inexcusable. I believed Robert's narrative that grandmother had approved these arrangements and that you were simply being emotional about necessary changes. Her frankness was unexpected but appreciated. What changed your perspective? I asked. Seeing the evidence firsthand, she replied. The trust documents, Jeffrey's discoveries about how the transfers were executed, but also watching you fight. so effectively not just for ownership but for something more meaningful, the principles and purpose Oak Ridge represents. She hesitated, then continued more quietly. And honestly, seeing the impact on our family, Jeffrey has been struggling tremendously with the division this has created, especially with his siblings. It's made both of us reconsider what actually matters beyond just financial success or status. This acknowledgement of the human cost of the conflict resonated deeply. While the legal battle had been necessary, its impact on family relationships created wounds that would take far longer to heal than any property dispute. Vanessa's willingness to acknowledge this reality and seek a more constructive path forward represented an unexpected opportunity for reconciliation alongside resolution. The following day brought another significant development. The district attorney offered Robert a plea arrangement addressing the criminal allegations, an arrangement that would require full admission of his actions regarding the fraudulent transfers. Substantial financial penalties and professional consequences, including potential disbarment from his financial management positions, but would avoid imprisonment if he fully cooperated with unwinding all related transactions. Samuel brought this news alongside his assessment of its implications. He'll likely accept the arrangement. The evidence against him has become overwhelming, particularly with Jeffrey's testimony and the additional documentation discovered in the vault. How does this affect the trust management going forward? I asked, focusing on Oak Ridge's future rather than Robert's legal fate. Once he accepts the plea, the provisions for trustee disqualification become straightforward to implement. You and the other uninvolved family members would then have full authority to establish the management structure moving forward. This development accelerated our timeline for implementing a sustainable plan for Oak Ridge. With legal questions approaching resolution, practical considerations about the estate's future operation now took priority. The university partnership offered promising educational and research dimensions, while Vanessa's event management perspective addressed financial sustainability. Claire's connections with preservation groups provided additional resources and expertise for authentic restoration of both the buildings and grounds. As these various elements coalesced into a comprehensive vision, I found myself increasingly drawn to a leadership role I hadn't initially anticipated. My academic background in historical documentation, combined with my deep personal connection to Oak Ridge, positioned me uniquely to coordinate these diverse aspects into a coherent approach, honoring both preservation and innovation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload.
From us!